All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us and for making the time to join this information session concerning the National Anti-Racism Fund project's grant stream. My name is Shannon Ryan, and I'm the Director of Community Investment at the CRF. First of all, let me inform you that today's session is being recorded and will be shared following the session, and that today's session will be delivered in English. A French session will be delivered tomorrow. Before we jump in, I would like to invite my community investment team colleagues to introduce themselves. Dalal, Leon, Ibrahim, Azara, Rosalind, Narjis, Martin, Jamal, and Arman. So folks, if you could jump on and briefly introduce yourselves.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this info session. My name is Ibrahim Agay. I'm the Associate Director of Community Investment. Pass it on to Zahra.
Hello, I'm Zara, and I'm the Regional Coordinator for BC, Yukon, and Northwest Territories. I'll pass it over to Dalal.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dalal Abdulrazak, and I'm a Partnership Manager.
I'll go after Dalal. My name is Leon Nawaj. I'm also a Partnership Manager, and I'll pass it to Rosalind.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. I'm Rosalind Kang. I'm the Regional Coordinator for the Prairies and Nunavut, and I'll pass it over to Narjas.
Hi everyone, my name is Narjis Ketat and I'm the Program Manager for the Quebec region. I'll pass it on to Jamal.
Hi everyone, I'm Jamal. I'm the Regional Coordinator for Ontario, and I will pass it to Harman.
Hi everyone, my name is Harman Magusi and I'm the Admin Assistant for the CI team. I think I'll pass it on to Martin.
Hi everyone, my name is Martin Aquino. I'm an admin assistant to the communications and the programs team. Today I will just be in the background assisting technical support.
Thank you,
I think I'm the
everybody.
last one.
You are indeed. Thank you, everyone. And folks that are joining us today, this is the amazing team of CRF staff that manage our granting processes, from applications to assessments to monitoring to payments as well. And so before we actually start today, I would like to offer my deep and profound thanks to this amazing team of individuals for running this program on behalf of the organization. Also, before we start, and as is kind of the practice of the CRF, I would like to, of course, start with an acknowledgement of the lands from which I'm speaking to you today, and to acknowledge the traditional stewards of these lands. And I'm speaking to you today from the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. And of course, the land that I'm speaking to you from today is home to many distinct and diverse First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. I also, of course, acknowledge that Toronto, where I'm speaking to you from today, and where the head office of the CRF is located, is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaty with the Mississaugas and also the Chippewa First Nations. You know, as this is a meeting of people living on many different lands, I think it's also essential that we acknowledge the many First Nations, Métis and Inuit people that have called these lands home for tens of thousands of years. And of course, we acknowledge them as the traditional stewards of these lands from coast to coast to coast, and acknowledge the many, many distinct groups of First Nation, Métis, and Inuit communities and peoples, each with their own language, custom, and lands. As I said, I'm joining you from Treaty 13 today, otherwise known as Toronto. And before there ever was a Toronto, or there was ever a Treaty 13 territory, there was a Takaranto, otherwise known by the Mohawk as where there are trees standing in the water. And I think it's equally essential that we acknowledge not just the names of these lands or the treaties that are in place, but that we also acknowledge the original inhabitants and the rightful caretakers and stewards that have lived on these lands, and again acknowledge their cultures and histories that have again shaped these lands for millennia. I think most recently these lands have been shaped, as we know, by histories of colonization and dehumanization, and it's our hope that in the future these lands will be shaped by our shared commitments to justice and liberation. I think finally, as we acknowledge not just the caretakers of these lands, we must also acknowledge the Indigenous elders and leaders and knowledge carriers who might be joining us today and who may have worked with the CRF. We actually sat with a knowledge carrier yesterday as part of our learning and our work related to reconciliation. And he reminded us that, we have a duty to learn, and that this learning must be done one day at a time and one step at a time. And most importantly, that it must always include commitments to both work that is focused on commitments, but also most importantly, action. And I challenge all of us as settlers on this call today to take meaningful action in what I hope are our shared commitments to truth and reconciliation. And one of the actions that the CRF actually takes is in relation to the National Anti-Racism Fund, which we are actually here to talk about today. So today, we're here to review and support potential grantees to learn more about the National Anti-Racism Fund project stream. It's our goal for you to walk away with a bit of a better understanding of the requirements of our stream and the funding, a better understanding of our expression of interest and overall application process, hopefully to deepen your understanding of our funding requirements, and ultimately to support the submission of strong applications that meet our funding criteria. It is our interest to ensure that you all submit strong applications and applications that meet our criteria. And this is the intent of our session today. Now, for those that have applied for NARF projects funding before, over the past several streams, you may have noticed several changes to our process this year, including the addition of a two-stage application process with an expression of interest process as the first stage, an increased focus on public policy outcomes to address structural roots of racism in Canada, and several others. And we'll walk through all of that with you today. Now, in terms of what we'll be covering specifically, here's the agenda. Of course, we'll talk about the purpose of the National Anti-Racism Fund. We'll dive a little bit into the themes and objectives and results, importantly. We'll talk a little bit about funding details and eligibility and walk you through, again, our two-stage application process, and also leave you with a bit of a better understanding of the types of support that we can offer through this process this year. Our presentations will take about 30 minutes, and we'll leave about 30 minutes at the end of the meeting for your questions. Now, importantly, we're asking that you submit your questions using the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. We'll be sorting through these questions throughout the session, and we'll address most of them in our last 30 minutes. I think given that we are now at almost 300 participants in this webinar today, we'll get to as many questions as we can. Some of them we'll answer live in the Q&A box, and others we'll speak to directly. Now, please note that we will prioritize questions regarding the application process, the grant criteria as well, and that we may not get to all questions in our short session today, largely because we have a limited amount of time. Now, if your question does not get answered through the Q&A session at the end, please make sure that you follow up with us at the grants@crf inbox email address. Finally, I'll say that the deck will be shared with all of you following this presentation, as will a recording of this session. So please make sure that you're watching out for that in order that you may reference the information again as you're completing your application. We can move on to the next slide, please. Now, I want to talk a little bit about kind of who we are and why we're doing this work. And I think many of you will know that as an organization, it's our mandate to strengthen the social fabric of Canadian society by supporting and enabling and convening, community groups like yours and organizations like yours to our grants, services and network of public research and community partners. We're a Crown corporation, and as an organization, we're committed to supporting community and grassroots organizations across these lands, whose mission is to, root out racism and discrimination through outreach and education. It's also our job to advance public policy that results in systemic change, and systemic change that gets to the roots of racism, racialization, et cetera, in Canada. We were a Crown corporation created by the Government of Canada in 1996 as part of the Japanese-Canadian Redress Agreement. And ultimately, we were created to reaffirm the principles of justice and equality for all in Canada. Now, one of the ways we meet this very lofty mission and mandate is through our National Anti-Racism Fund, otherwise known as NARF, which supports our commitments as an organization to building a national framework to fight against racism in Canadian society, ultimately through strengthening organizations and the capacity of racialized communities, religious minority groups, and Indigenous people. Really, it's our interest to support these groups to carry out their own work to combat racism and create meaningful dialogues and opportunities around these issues. And ultimately, creating learning opportunities and sharing opportunities with the broader public. To date, we've done a lot with NARF. Over the past couple of years, we've contributed almost $8 million to projects like the ones you all delivered, to more than 400 organizations. And I think that this is a significant investment in our shared and collective work towards eliminating racism in Canada. And we'll do more this year. In fiscal year 2024-25, NARF will provide about $3 million in total funding, with $1 million going towards Events and Youth Initiative grants and $2 million directed to NARF projects. You may know that we've just recently completed this year's round of Events and Youth Initiative funding, and we'll be publicly announcing the outcomes of that process in the coming weeks. Now, before I turn it over to Zara, I'd just like to take a moment to thank you all for attending today's session and for being involved in NARF projects funding. We really appreciate your contributions and your engagement in these processes, and we're very much looking forward to reviewing your applications as they come in. So with that, I will pass it over to my colleague, Zara. Zara, over to you.
Thanks, Shannon. I will now go through the themes and objectives and also expected results of the projects. So firstly, applications must align with one or more of the following themes and objectives. These are in no particular order, and we are interested in funding activities in all areas. So these include the following 4. Systemic racial barriers, reducing barriers to inclusion by addressing systemic racism in education, healthcare, the justice system, public service, employment, and public life. Research and education, so promoting and increasing availability and accessibility of data, evidence, and community insight on race relations in Canada. Public awareness, informing public policies by highlighting or raising awareness on systemic and institutional barriers. And then cultural and intercultural community building, so creating cross-cultural opportunities through discussions and dialogue on race, religion, building awareness, and collaborations. Next slide. Applications must achieve one or more of the following expected results. As with the previous, these are in no particular order, but they include increasing public awareness of public policy issues related to race relations, anti-racism, anti-hate, nationality, regionality, or locality. Increasing public awareness of Canada's cultural diversity. Increasing awareness of factors such as race, culture, ethnicity, or religion that may be hindering full participation of the entire Canadian population in society and the economy. And then finally, increasing knowledge and capacity within communities to address racism and discrimination. I'll now pass it over to my colleague, Dalal.
Thank you, Zahra. So as Shannon mentioned earlier, this year the application process for the project's funding stream is a little different from past years. So this time around, the application process will consist of 2 steps. In step 1, we are asking applicants to submit an expression of interest. And then if the expression of interest is approved by the CRRF review team, you will be invited to the second step of the process, which is the submission of a full application. The purpose of the EOI is basically to help the CRRF team conduct an initial assessment of the project idea and check for its alignment with the priorities of the National Anti-Racism Fund. And this would include an assessment of applicants' organizational eligibility, organizational capacity, project idea, project activities, as well as the requested project funding amount. So the project's funding stream has a total of $2 million available, and funding for any proposed project can range from, excuse me, from a minimum of $25,000 to a maximum of $125,000. And applicants would only be eligible to receive funding for one application. So if you already have a NARF event or youth initiative grant in progress, you are still eligible to submit an application for this funding stream. And applicants with 2023-2024 NARF projects in progress may apply, but for a different project idea. If you are a current awardee and wish to apply for a continuation of an ongoing project, it's important to note that the ongoing project activities must be completed with a final report submitted and reviewed before the full application deadline, which I believe would be around January 2025. That's yet to be confirmed. So all projects must be implemented between April 1st, 2025 and March 31st, 2026. And all project activities must be completed by March 31st, 2026. And the CRRF will provide 40% of the funds to successful grantees upon contract signing, with an additional 40% that will be released once the grantee submits a short interim report. And then the remaining 20% of funds will be released after the submission of a final report. And that final report must be submitted within 60 days of project completion. And please note that for applicants who are currently being funded by the Department of Canadian Heritage's Multiculturalism and Anti-Racism Program, or the Department of Canadian Heritage's Anti-Racism Action Program, those applicants will only be considered for funding if the application is intended to extend or expand the existing initiative. So in terms of processing timelines, the CRRF SurveyMonkey Apply grant platform is accepting EOI applications until October 31st, 2024. Decisions will be made 5 weeks after the submission deadline. And then successful EOI applicants will be invited to submit a full application by early December 2024. And then for the full application, the successful EOI applicants will have 5 weeks to submit their full application between early December 2024 and early January 2025. And then we anticipate contacting successful applicants by early March 2025. Please do note that all these decisions are final and there is no appeal process through this funding program. So while a public policy focus is not a mandatory requirement for this funding stream, the CRRF is particularly interested in projects that aim to address gaps in current public policies, or those that are offering viable policy alternatives, or those that wish to implement new public policies that are aimed at dismantling systemic racism and the structural barriers faced by Indigenous, Black, and other racialized communities, as well as religious minority groups. These themes do align with CRRF's strategic priorities, excuse me, which include catalyzing policy change and supporting community capacity and knowledge mobilization. So to help us to better identify and support the policy-focused projects that aim to strengthen race relations in Canada. We do encourage applicants to share any relevant public policy elements of their project, if it's applicable, at the EOI stage. And some examples of projects that do have a policy lens could include projects that involve a range of strategies, such as conducting research that will inform policymakers about the impacts of systemic racism. Projects that include developing advocacy campaigns and mobilizing communities to pursue policy change, or creating educational programs that increase public awareness and the public's understanding of key policy issues. Other examples could include projects that have collaborations with other organizations or governments or community groups to influence policy decisions. And projects that actively work to influence public policy, whether this would be through direct advocacy efforts, in-depth research, strategic partnerships, or grassroots community engagement. Again, please do note that a policy lens is not a requirement for receiving NARF projects funding, but it's definitely an interest. So to be eligible to apply, applicants must be either Canadian registered charities and Canadian nonprofit organizations and associations, First Nations, Inuit, and Métis organizations, Canadian non-federal public institutions such as municipalities, boards of education, schools, and universities, or labor organizations. And the following are ineligible to apply: for-profit organizations, federal institutions, individuals, organizations whose purpose is solely related to political activity as it's defined by the Canada Revenue Agency, and grassroots organizations. And for reference, CRRF defines grassroots organizations as unincorporated collectives who are comprised of local community members driving solutions to community issues. So in this slide, we have a complete list of the eligible and ineligible project expenses. And these are included in the guidelines as well, but some examples of eligible expenses include personnel and staffing costs, project costs such as workshop and meeting costs, marketing and communications, transporting, and so forth. Services of consultants or experts who will be participating in the delivery of the project, evaluation costs, which include project evaluation expenses such as survey administration, focus groups, and reporting, and overhead and administrative costs that are directly related with project delivery. And this can be requested to a maximum of 15% of the total budget. Ineligible expenses include costs that are related to direct financial assistance in the form of payment to individuals or families, for example, loans, grants, scholarships, ongoing occupancy costs, cost of alcoholic beverages, basic shelter beds or transitional housing beds, and so forth. And now I will pass this on to my colleague, Leandre.
Thank you so much. And sorry for the delay on my end. So now I'll be walking you through the application process on SurveyMonkey Apply, which I hope is generally straightforward. But before going through those steps, we'd just like to make sure that one, you know that applications will only be accepted through the SurveyMonkey Apply platform. And 2, that you know where to find your way to get onto the SurveyMonkey Apply platform. So the link to access the SurveyMonkey Apply platform is available on our website on the program guidelines. Okay, and so to begin, the steps in applying are 1, to go to the application portal, to create or use an existing profile to fill out the online application form. 2, to complete and submit your expression of interest application form. 3, to attach your most recent annual financial statements, so those of the last 2 years, or a financial letter of explanation if you are a newly incorporated organization. And for this, it means that you've been incorporated for less than 2 years. Financial statements must be audited if your annual revenues are above $250,000. Lastly, make sure to press submit and refer back to our decision-making deadlines to see when you will receive news regarding your application. All completed applications will be followed by a confirmation email, which will indicate that your application was successfully received by our team. And as mentioned earlier, the CRF SurveyMonkey Apply Grant platform will only accept expression of interest applications from September 19th, 2024 to the end of October 31st, 2024. And just to note, if you would like to reference our application, you can do so. It is available as a PDF on our website, so you could see the questions beforehand. However, this PDF is only for reference and is not to be used in your submission. Great, so this takes us to what the SurveyMonkey platform looks like. So this is more of a technical aspect of the application process. So to ensure that your application is submitted, please remember to click on the green submit button circled on the screen, so to my left. In step 1, after that submit button has been pressed, you will be brought to step 2, where you will see an application submitted message. And then in step 3, this is what you should see on your application screen when it has been successfully submitted. And so as you can see, there is a date and time of the submission. Following this, you will receive a confirmation email from SurveyMonkey Apply, ensuring that all of these steps have been completed. We'd like to now bring your attention to the financial letter of explanation for newly incorporated organizations. If you are a newly incorporated organization, again, less than 2 years old, and you cannot produce any financial statements, then you must submit a written statement instead, attesting to your financial management capabilities and organizational capacity. So the following questions must be answered in total in 300 words or less. First question, please tell us why you could not submit a financial statement. Next, what were your main sources of income, money that you receive, and expenses, money that you pay out over the last year? And please describe them. Next, how do you track or manage your income and expenses? Does your organization have a bank account for its operations? If yes, please indicate the person's name and the title that manages that account. Does your organization have a designated person who prepares, reviews, and approves financial reports, or is responsible for overseeing the financials? If yes, please indicate their name and title. Does your organization have a deficit? If yes, what amount? Should the organization be successful in securing CRF funding, what financial challenges or risks might exist, and how do you imagine mitigating those challenges or risks? And finally, when do you anticipate obtaining your first audited financial statement? So again, these answers must be submitted in lieu of an annual financial statement if you are a newly incorporated organization. So for recognition requirements, we ask that organizations publicly acknowledge the financial support received from the CRRF through NARF with the following phrase. This project was made possible through the financial support of the Canadian Race Relations Foundation's National Anti-Racism Fund. Additionally, successful applicants are required to complete a grant contract, submit their interim report as well as their final report on the SurveyMonkey Apply platform, and to have an evaluation plan in place. To complete the interim and final reports, projects will need to collect their own data according to their own evaluation plans. Evaluation plans will vary from organization to organization, but they should allow for organizations to report on a number of things, including project activities and outcomes, alignment with NARF objectives and expected results, project implementation impact and sustainability, as well as public acknowledgement of the CRRF. So next, we get to the evaluation process. So the following criteria will be used to evaluate all eligible applications: alignment with NARF program themes and objectives, achievement of one or more of the expected results, which were mentioned in an earlier slide, demonstration of the experience, both human resources and financial resources, governance structure, and capacity to successfully carry out the project based on past experience, demonstration of need within the local, regional, and/or national context, and that the project budget is detailed, reasonable, balanced, and takes into consideration the efficient and effective use of funds. And it must indicate if the project can continue even if CRRF was only able to allocate partial funding. Along with these criteria, we are also working to ensure a well-rounded mix of projects in terms of geography, language, and other factors. We also want to note here that we receive way more applications than the funds that we're able to give out. So to illustrate this, our most recent project stream maximum funding available was also $2 million, but we received over $50 million in funding requests. And this is all to say that NARF funding is competitive, and based on the number of applications we received this round, we may only be able to fund a fraction of them. So I would now like to introduce our regional coordinators and program manager on the screen here. So from left to right, I'll start with Narges, who is our programs manager based in Quebec. We then have Kevin, who is our regional coordinator for Atlantic Canada, Rosalind, who is our regional coordinator for the Prairies and Nunavut, Zara, who is our regional coordinator for British Columbia, Yukon, and Northwest Territories, and Jamal, who is our regional coordinator for Ontario. And the role of these wonderful individuals is to monitor successful applications for their region, after the contracting stage is complete. So again, this is after the contracting stage is complete. Next, in order to reach out to us, we have our email here on screen, grants@crrf-fcrr.ca. When you're writing to us, be sure to write National Anti-Racism Fund application in the subject line of your email, so we know immediately what kind of information might be included. We also have our project guidelines to learn more about this funding program, and then frequently asked questions where you might be able to easily find an answer to your question. Now we'll move on to the Q&A portion, taking advantage of the time we have together so that we can answer any questions you have related to the application process and grant criteria. And as Shannon mentioned earlier today, we may not be able to get to all questions, but we'll do our best to get to as many of them as possible. And so at this time, I will hand over the virtual mic to Zara and Rosalind, who will help moderate the Q&A portion. Over to you both.
Thank you, Leon. I can start with asking the first question. Do public institutions like universities have to submit financial statements, or only organizations like charities and labor organizations, etc.?
Yeah, I can take that one on. Universities also have to submit the financial statements. It's a requirement that is applied to all applicants.
Thank you, Lynn.
Question 2. So regarding audited financial statements, in 2023, this organization received slightly over $250,000. However, a significant portion of that for their program work in 2024. So in this case, are audited statements required?
So just to understand, it was 1 year that they had that was over 250,000, and the other one they were below 250,000. Is that correct?
I believe so, yes.
I would say if they have an audited financial statement for that year over 250,000, please submit it. If not, just send us the financial statement that you have for that year unaudited, and to also send the financial statement for the other year as well.
There's another question about, is there a list of researchers currently engaged in research on systemic barriers that we can link our proposed projects with? It looks like they're suggesting that the proposal can provide evidence to support this research. It would be good to see if they can partner or build off existing research.
So yeah, I can take a stab at this. I think, I mean, you're open to applying and collaborating for different, organizations with different bodies. So if this is the direction you want to go in, we don't see anything against it. I would say reach out to the organization, see how it aligns with your own project vision, and then be sure to submit an application within the project before the application deadline.
Thank you. Would internal anti-racism training for senior leadership and/or frontline workers who interact with a diverse public population qualify for funding?
Sorry, I'm just rereading the question. Thanks, Sarah. Internal anti-racism training for senior leadership. Yeah, I mean, and I would just highlight for everybody just to double check the program guidelines to make sure you're in line with that, because that will really give you a sense of whether your project is aligned or not. But my gut reaction, or my first sense to reading this, is that it should align, but of course we'll have to read more into the details of your application. And I'll hand it off to you, Shannon, because I see you unmuted.
Yeah, I just might add a little bit to the additional context that folks will see in our objectives and our outcomes that there's a big focus on public awareness and a big focus on a policy this year. And so I would urge organizations that are applying, if you want to do some internal work, just making sure that you're linking it to, I would say, outcomes outside of your organization, especially in the areas of public awareness and/or policy change, right? So I would say historically, we've not funded a lot of work that is solely focused internally, especially when it focuses on the training of staff members in an organization, again, because of the broader objectives of NARF. But if you can make the connection, please feel free to try.
There's a question about the final reports for these projects and when they're going to be due. Is it due January 2025 or 2026?
The final report would be due in 2026.
Thank you.
So one more question after submission of reports and signing contracts. So what information is to be contained in the interim and final report?
Well, the first bit I can speak to is the funds regarding the sort of the money that we've sent out so far. Has it been used? Has it been used according to what you said you were going to use it for? So being able to speak to that at a high level as well. How's the project going? Giving us a sense of that. And then once we get those information in, it's evaluated by our regional coordinators and program manager as well. And then if everything looks good, then we would move on to sort of approving the outstanding monies, and then you would be submitting your final report, which of course would speak to sort of how everything has gone with regards to your project.
There's a question about an organization currently has a CS Mari grant. It completes March 31st, 2025. And this project application starts the project funding starts in April 1st, 2025. Does it still have to be an extension of the current CS Mari grant, or can it be a new project?
I'll hand it over to you, Shannon.
Yeah, it could be both. So it could be this extension addition of the current grant, as long as it builds on that grant through CS Mari or other funding through PCH, or it can be absolutely new. I think we set this requirement in the interest of reducing duplication, right? We don't want to be funding necessarily the exact same thing that our PCH colleagues have funded at the exact same time. And so just so folks know, we do a due diligence check against what we are approving for funding and what's PCH, CS Mari, and other programs are currently funding. And so we do a secondary analysis to reduce the likelihood of that level of duplication of funding. But both options are available to you folks. And again, if it's a continuation, just make sure that you're creating a distinction between what was funded and what you're moving towards in terms of new funding potentially from us. Leon, anything you'd add to that?
No, I think it's that point about duplication of funds really is what I was going to say.
Next question, is the project implementation date range cast in stone, or could the project be implemented outside of the date range? For instance, carrying the project out in March 2025.
Yes. Oh, Dalal.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that it is a set time frame. So all projects must take place between April 1st, 2025 and end by March 31st, 2026.
Are municipal art galleries or centers eligible to apply for the project grant?
You would definitely have to look at the eligible and ineligible organizations. I think Dalal went over them earlier today. So if you're, registered organization, whether a charity or registered nonprofit, then you're eligible to apply. So I would just check sort of your CRA status, and then, whether you fall into the ineligible or eligible category.
So building off of that, if your project is in partnership with another organization, are the same parameters necessary for the partner, i.e. financial statements? And then what if the partner is not a charity, but you are?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we are assessing the lead applicant. So the person hitting submit, the person we're signing the contract with, the information for that, not person, but that organization needs to meet our requirements. So not necessarily for your for the partners you're working with.
Okay. Is it possible to elaborate a little bit more on the policy lens? Is it not required? And this is, I think, going back to Dalal's presentation.
Yeah, I can try to answer that. So the policy lens isn't required, but it's definitely an interest of CRRFs and is strongly aligned with our strategic priority to address systemic barriers and dismantle systemic racism. So you won't be penalized if your project is not focused on addressing public policies, but it's definitely an interest of ours. I don't know if anyone else has anything to add to that.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'd add to that, Dalal, is that, yeah, we are definitely interested in supporting public policy solutions in ways that are more significant than we have in the past. You know, I think that there are many, many responses to racism in Canada, from the personal and in terms of building public awareness to the structural. And so we want to make sure that we're funding a full range of interventions that not just gets to the personal and interpersonal outcomes related to racism in Canada and or racialization, but also the structures that might be contributing to racism in Canada. And those are structures that can exist within public institutions, including organizations like ours. And so there's definitely a prioritization from our lens, from our end this year on public policy interventions. And as Dalal said, it's not a requirement of funding, but certainly something that we're putting a bit more of a fine point on this year.
Would a wage subsidy fall into the same category of ineligible costs like scholarships or grants?
Yeah, I think we would want to assess that on a case-by-case basis. If you're able to demonstrate that it's a cost associated with the program directly, we might look at it. However, if it's a flow through of scholarship funding only, that might raise some questions for us. But I suggest you follow up with that question at the grants at inbox, and we can learn a little bit more about that question from you directly, and then we can offer, I think, a more fulsome response.
Okay. I think there's some sort of clarification needed on if you receive funding from Multiculturalism and Anti-Racism Initiatives Program from the Federal Department of Heritage, how does this impact your application?
Yeah, so just to go back to the example of the duplication of funds, so if you've received funding from Heritage and you're applying for the exact same project and looking for sort of the same types of supports within your budget, that is not something we would want to sort of duplicate the funding for, right? But if it's sort of additional funds that you need, for example, to carry out the funds to, and or the project is extending beyond your agreement with Heritage, then certainly we could look at assessing and potentially funding an application like that.
So another question regarding budget. Is the allowable overhead amount of 15% in addition to the maximum budget allowance of 125,000?
No, it's 15% of that 125,000.
Thank you.
There's a question about, it says, you stated Canadian nonprofits are eligible. Does that also mean provincial nonprofits?
Yes, it does.
Can I jump in? Clarification quickly for that previous question. It's not 15% of 125,000. 125,000 is the maximum amount you can ask for. But if you requesting 50,000, that's 15% of 50,000 included to the total of 50,000, but not 15% of 125,000. I hope that's clear. Depending the amount of fund you're requesting, that's 15,000, 15% of that amount, total amount you're asking for, including. I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, that was an important clarification.
Thanks, Ibrahima. For those that have applied to the Youth and Events Grant recently, can they also apply for this project grant? And is there anything that they need to be aware of?
Can we take that one? Go ahead, Dalal.
I was just going to say, yes, you can apply, but you do need to ensure that your final report is submitted before the implementation start date of this project. Did I say that correctly?
Yeah, I think I would offer a bit of a clarification. So as I said at the top, we've just completed a round of events and youth initiative funding. We're about to announce the outcomes. And if you are a successful grantee, well, yeah, you're eligible to apply for this round of projects funding. If you have a current projects funding in place, I think that reporting requirement does stand for sure. We wanna make sure that we're have a sense of the closure of your current project before we jump into another project. I don't know, Leon, if you have anything to add to that.
No, that's pretty clear.
Thank you. There's a question about, do you need to have a trustee if you are a newer nonprofit and have financial statements, but not showing that you have managed the amount of funding you are requesting?
Yeah. So thanks for that question. So for the project stream, we're focused on funding a range of applicants as was stated on the earlier slides, charities, nonprofits, so on and so forth. We are not funding grassroots organizations, for example, but if you're working with an organization and they submit an application, they take on sort of the legal responsibilities and whatnot, they can submit an application, perhaps with you as a partner or something like that, but we're not we're not granting grassroots in this particular round of funding. And Shannon, is there anything you'd add?
No, that's totally correct. I think we've been pretty clear in terms of the organizations that are eligible to apply. We've, I would say, expanded our eligibility over the past couple of years to include, yes, registered charities that are registered with CRA in terms of charitable status, but also organizations that are either provincially or federally incorporated, that are simply incorporated organizations. So we've broadened in some ways. So in terms of grassroots that do not meet eligibility requirements, yeah, please consider applying in partnership with an organization that meets one of the requirements that are included in the eligibility list. It could be a registered charity. It could be an organization that's incorporated, right? So there is some flexibility there.
Thanks, Shannon. I have a question about ongoing funding. So should someone be a successful applicant, do they have to then apply for additional funding every year in the years to follow?
Yeah, at this point, we are a funder that provides only funding to a maximum of 1 year. At this point, we do not deliver multi-year funding or make multi-year commitments at this point. And so there is a requirement that you report and reapply for sure. Although I would just say that I think we recognize the challenges of submitting multiple reports and the challenging nature of short-term funding and delivering a project within relatively short timelines. And that, of course, is always on our minds as we're thinking about the future of our granting program.
Thanks, Shannon. How are newer organizations evaluated versus some of the more established nonprofits? Are there barriers or extra considerations if you are newer or smaller or less established as other organizations?
I feel like my colleagues will have a few things to say on this, but I can start. I think when it comes to new organizations or smaller organizations, impact is important, and that can be achieved even for an itty-bitty small organization. So definitely that's what we're looking for, right? Do you have a connection to the community? Are we seeing impact? are changes being made? Are you addressing the themes and objectives that we've laid out? So, you know, we understand there's differences between the big and the small organizations, but we are looking to support sort of everybody across the board.
Yeah, I would put an exclamation point on that. I think we've done work over the past year or so to, I would say, maybe level the playing field between long, you know, multi-million-dollar organizations, long-term multi-million organizations with charitable status, big budgets, and organizations that are brand new and have important and deep connections to the community. And so you can see that we've put in place some steps, you know, including the letter of explanation around finances and other opportunities for us to, again, level the playing field to the extent that we can within this process. I would say that we consider them on an equal footing in many ways. And I would say as well, finally, that, you know, some of the best projects we funded over the past year or two have been delivered by grassroots organizations, and they certainly stack up against any of the other applications that we have approved. So we've done our best to level the playing field in this regard.
Thank you. So question on reporting. Do we provide templates for these reports?
Sarah,
I can answer that. Yes, we do. So templates are available in SurveyMonkey, which is the online portal you will be using to submit your application. So it's all there and it is available to you.
There's a question about if you can save your progress during the application process on SurveyMonkey.
yeah, I think the button is save and continue. So make sure you hit that. So so whatever you've inputted, it is saved on the platform.
And another question, is it possible to speak on the phone with our regional grants officer, or regional coordinators if we have questions or need clarifications?
If you do have any questions regarding this application process, we encourage you to get in touch with the email address provided here. It's our grants inbox, grants@crrffcrr.ca.
I'm just going to go add some clarification for speaking to a regional coordinator. Regional coordinator are not really to support or give advice on your application. It's that email that Dalal just said, that's your best bet. However, once you are successful, you'll be linked to the regional coordinator in your region, and they'll be supporting you and implementing your project. Just wanted to add that.
Thanks, Ibrahima. There is a question about if we could clarify if hospitals, particularly those working internally to address systemic barriers to anti-racism in partnership with their foundation arms, are eligible to apply for the fund.
Yeah, I think so. From the sounds of it, yes. Over to you, Shannon.
Yeah, I would offer the same framing that we offered earlier around kind of finding that balance between the range of activities that we're interested in funding, including public awareness, including public policy change. And I think the importance of demonstrating links between whatever you're doing internally and external outcomes as well, to the extent that you can.
So I've got a question about eligible budget items. Would travel for dissemination of findings, for instance, attending conferences, be considered an eligible budget item?
Yeah, that sounds like sort of the mobilization of knowledge mobilizations, and so that would be eligible.
There is a question about whether or not there are specific quotas by regions.
I would say that we do not have specific quotas. That said, I would say that we do our best to ensure a balance in terms of regional representation of our grantees. We want to make sure that as a national crown corporation, we are funding organizations and projects in every province, in every territory. And it's in our interest to ensure a balance in this area. We all know the story of Ontario and Quebec kind of sometimes being framed as a center of the universe. I will say that we get the most applications from Ontario and Quebec, and we do absolutely do our best to ensure that there's a balancing that happens. Again, ensuring that we're funding in historically underrepresented regions, especially in the North, especially in the Maritimes, and in some cases the prairies as well. So we do not have a quota, but we certainly have a sense of how we try to achieve some balance. And I would say that also goes for the types of projects that we fund, whether it's a focus on anti-Black racism, anti-Indigenous racism, anti-Semitism, and Islamophobia. We want to ensure that we're getting a balance and being as responsive as we can as we're approving our grants.
Thanks, Shannon. Maybe in the interest of time, I'll answer the final question, which is, will a recording of the webinar be available?
Yeah, I can take that one and then wrap up. And so, yes, so after today's session, you will all receive an email with a copy of the deck that we've reviewed today and a copy of this recording. It will be a link to a YouTube channel, and you'll be able to view it how you want to view it and or share it with other team members who are supporting the submission of your application. Okay. And so with that, I've got the pleasure of both opening today's meeting and closing today's meeting. First, let me say there are a number of questions still in the chat. We got to as many of them as we could. If you have a burning question following today's session, especially after you've done another review of the content and or the presentation today, please, as Dalal and Leanda have suggested, send your questions to the grants inbox, and we have a pretty quick turnaround on those. So please do. I also want to, in closing, again, say a big thanks to our amazing team, Leon, Dalal, Sharon, who is not here today, Zara, Rosalind, Ibrahima, Narjas, Jamal, Arman, and Martin for their contributions to this program and for delivering this session today. And as a final word, I again want to thank you all for attending this session today. We are really looking forward to seeing your expressions of interest in a couple of weeks, and really looking forward to learning more about your projects and more about your organizations. We appreciate the time that you've made for us today, and best of luck with your applications. Thank you so much.